So there's a couple of things I'd like you to highlight that I find very unique about Xin Yi. And then we'll pass the floor over to her, and she'll tell you more. So first of all, Xinyi is Singaporean, and she's dialing in actually from China. So we're very fortunate that she's here with us today. Secondly, Xinyi comes from a very fascinating background. When we were chatting last week, she was telling me how she sort of entered the oil and gas domain initially with very little knowledge, and then very quickly she came out as an expert. So it's no surprise to me that when we were discussing Pinduoduo's very unique business model and the way she's setting it up, that she's entered a brand new domain, very quickly energized it, figured it out, and she's working in a country that is not naturally her home. And she's bringing actually very interesting enterprise through her role at Pinduoduo. So what I found fascinating was that they are looking at a very impactful manner of engaging with the communities in China, rural communities. And it's quite interesting how this sort of entrepreneurship model is connecting with people on the ground who perhaps naturally would not be engaging with technology. And opening up new doors for them. So I don't want to steal too much of the thunder, but I thought these three key things were fascinating to me when I had the privilege of speaking to her earlier. So let me hand you over to Xinyi, who will share with us a bit about her background and what she's doing and how she's incorporated sustainability, corporate responsibility, and a sense of purpose, not only in her personal work, but through her organization. Over to you, Xinyi.
Thank you, Nisa, for all the kind words. I definitely don't profess to be an expert in sustainability. And certainly I think for, oil and gas, it was a big challenge that was handed to me when I was a fresh graduate who had just joined GIC. My background was actually in philosophy, politics, and economics for my undergrad, and I did my master's in East Asian studies. So absolutely nothing to do with oil and gas. The only thing I knew about it was because my home in Singapore is near Jurong. So, the Jurong Island is about the extent of my knowledge. So I think definitely, as I shared with Nisa in our conversation last week, one thing that I've, appreciated is having the opportunity to learn about a lot of different sectors and given the chance to access resources, right? And then get quickly up to speed with kind of where the industry is at, where are the potential opportunities for collaboration, and then trying to sort of connect the dots. So that is something that I really do enjoy doing. And I think the opportunity to join a fast-growing company like Pinduoduo and experience startup or tech life in China was also something that was very appealing to me. And I think to Nisa's point, we are an unconventional company, right? So most people would know Pinduoduo as an e-commerce platform, kind of like Taobao, right? People go there and buy all kinds of things under the sun. And indeed, in the last 5 years, we have actually narrowed sort of the gap between us and the market leader, Taobao, with Tmall, right? So in terms of the users on our platform today, we have close to 700 million annual active buyers on our platform, buying everything under the sun. And agricultural products is actually a sizable component. So last year, we sold close to $20 billion worth of agricultural goods through our platform. And a lot of these agricultural products are coming directly from farmers, right? Maybe there's one more layer of somebody who's doing the packaging, the cleaning, and then mailing it out. And then straight to consumers who are all over China. So suddenly, for the first time, right, people are able to discover good quality fruits that they may not have had access to in their local markets, right? So, people may be able to consume passion fruit or kiwi for the first time in their lives, right, at a very affordable price point because it's coming directly from the farmer to the consumer. And at the same time, because you're cutting out all the intermediaries, the farmer is still able to make more than they would make through the traditional distribution system. So this is actually something that we have quite a lot of pride in and still continue to endeavor to do better, right? So when we're looking at, the tools that we can provide with farmers, can we train them, right? So that they're better able to transition from being just a farmer to being more like an agripreneur, right? Can we also work together with other partners, whether it's local governments or agronomic research institutes, to give these farmers more knowledge, right? To help organize them in a way such that they can actually, make more money and have the ability to invest for their future, right? And all of this, of course, benefits our consumers, so that at the end of the day, right, the consumer is still able to enjoy good quality fruit at a very affordable price, even going into the future, right? Not worrying about, the farming population maybe not being able to keep up with the growing demand of the urbanized core. So that's, I think, a broader trend that will still continue to unfold in China, and is something that in my current role, I'm very active in, right? So talking to different parts of the agri-food ecosystem, also understanding what their capabilities are, where they're at in terms of, servicing farmers, or maybe in terms of innovative technologies, how everything can stitch together. So that is what I'm primarily focused on. And I would say, sustainability is very much bundled up with that, right, at Pinduoduo, because when you can improve the farmers' farming practices, not only can you improve their productivity, you're also helping the environment, right? Because now they don't have to use as much fertilizer or pesticide as they would, without training or without education. So it's something that we see is very closely intertwined at Pinduoduo. So I'll just pause there for now.
Thanks, Xinyi. Thank you. That was quite an interesting model that you have there. I was wondering whether you could share with our viewers, what is your brand's purpose, and what makes it relevant in today's climate. Highly economic driven. China is growing so quickly, and then in the midst of all this, we are sort of recovering from the impact of COVID globally. So, tell us about your brand's purpose and relevance.
Sure. I think that's a very timely question that a lot of companies worldwide are thinking hard about, right? Especially as COVID has really been unprecedented times that have strained, I think, operations as well as potentially bottom lines for a lot of companies. I think one thing that attracted me about Pinduoduo when I was thinking about joining it was that our founder outlined our core value as being 本分. So it's a Chinese term that actually loosely translates to kind of doing what you should be doing, right? It's kind of your duty. And I think we really displayed that, during sort of the first half of this year, right? When China underwent a lot of strict lockdown measures to slow down the spread of COVID-19. So when we saw, for instance, that, masks, personal protective equipment prices were spiking through the roof, we stepped in and basically helped to subsidize the products, right? Such that, everyone who wants to get that product, they still have a chance. They're not paying like 5 times the price or whatever it is. At the same time, we also stepped up our inspection efforts, right? To make sure that people aren't, feeding in low quality or counterfeit PPE, right? And trying to profit off of the situation. So I think that definitely was something that we see as fulfilling our duty, right? And I think, the broader question of our purpose, we see ourselves as an enabler for building digital communities, right? So one thing that a lot of people may know about Pinduoduo is that we are one of the pioneers in social commerce, right? So this concept of, forming a team, buying together with your friends and family to enjoy a lower price, a lot of that interaction that typically happens offline, we have enabled that to happen online in the shopping setting. Right. But then beyond just sort of, me sending Nisa a link and saying like, hey, let's buy, cheap apples together, right? There's also a lot more interaction that typically does happen offline, right? When you're making certain purchases, you might want to have your friends' input, right? Like, hey, Nisa, you're an expert in electronic appliances, right? So I'm thinking of, getting this upgrade for my home, which one should I pick or what would you advise? So there are all these kinds of interactions that happen offline naturally. And we're thinking about, how do we play a role to transform that online, right? Such that people still have that sense of being connected, even when, you can't see each other face to face, which was absolutely the case with COVID-19, right? So again, one of the features that we rolled out in the earlier part of the year actually helped people to see recommendations or reviews from their friends, right? So this is a way of actually bringing very relevant information on something that's very pressing in front of the user, right? So that they can make better decisions in especially pressing time. So I think that's really how we see ourselves, right? So starting with e-commerce, starting with connecting people, helping them discover things that would be of interest, of relevance to them. How do we then maybe expand that, right? So maybe through live streaming, for instance, which has been a huge phenomenon in China, right? How do we actually maybe weave that in and allow the consumers to not just be a passive viewer, they can also interact, right? And they can exchange knowledge with the seller. And then when you look in a certain application, for instance, with farming, one thing that we did at the beginning of the year as well was to actually provide farming inputs, right? So now farmers who historically would have bought these things through offline distribution and could not because of COVID-19, they could actually access these products through our platform, right? So you could order your, t-shirt, your socks, your detergent, but you could also order seeds, right, or fertilizer or pesticides, etc., and that could be delivered to you. And then when you need a bit more of the expert knowledge, you could actually engage directly with the seller, right? So then this is an entirely different mode of engagement that is new to a lot of people. But I think from the continued engagement we've seen on our platform, it does go to show that people see value in that, right? Being able to instantly form a connection with someone, exchange information, get very targeted advice. So I think that's a trend that we see continuing, and we'll continue to think about, what are some of the other elements that we can design to encourage that shopping or browsing or just playing together, right? So on our platform, we also have very interactive games. For instance, Duoduo Orchard is our most popular game. We have over 60 million daily active users going to Duoduo Orchard. Right? And basically, it's a very simple game. Anyone from age 8 to 80 can play the game. But, it's really just you accumulate water droplets to water your digital fruit tree, right? And you accumulate these droplets by making purchases, by browsing, by doing all kinds of activities on the platform. And then when your tree actually bears fruit, we will send you a real box of fruits, right? So it's a fun gamified way of actually encouraging people to still engage and interact with each other on the platform. I can visit my friends' fruit trees, I can steal water from them, or I can water it for them. So all these kinds of ways are means in which we try to recreate that interactive element that people used to enjoy more in the offline setting, but were missing in the online world.
Well, this is fascinating. Traditionally, right, sort of growing up, or I'm sure it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in, you sort of convene at a fixed location. Maybe a fixed table in your school canteen, or after 7, when everybody's back from work, you convene at a particular neighbor's home. But what you're doing is you've just kind of blown away all the physical walls, right? In this digital realm, it doesn't matter where you are, where you sit. Do you have any, I was wondering whether you have any personal stories of how you've seen, how this physical barriers have just disappeared, and how, perhaps somebody's life has changed through the work you're doing. Any examples that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. So I'll share a story from when I visited one of our Duoduo farms in Yunnan province last year. So this was around Christmas time, and we have a partnership with the Yunnan provincial government to basically develop pilot farms in the province of Yunnan, specifically the more impoverished counties. So we have a project in this valley gorge. It's called Nujiang, and basically the project there involves us sort of starting up a cooperative for the local farmers. So we, inject some seed funding, and the farmers pull their land together, and they have a cooperative that they're jointly working together with an agronomist from the Yunnan Academy of Agricultural Sciences. They introduced a package sort of guiding them, okay, you should, grow your citrus this way, right? You should be growing this other crop that also has very high value and is suitable to the region. And one of the farmers whom we visited, who's a member of the co-op, he actually was, from a young age, he suffered a physical disability. So he gets around by sort of crawling, right? Basically, because he has one functional leg, right? And then he just crawls around with his two hands. And he's in a very mountainous region, right? So actually through the cooperative, he is able to enjoy a more steady revenue stream. And it's also less strenuous on him, right? Because his income is now no longer tied to his independent ability to farm his own field, right? He's now part of a cooperative. And then there are certain technologies that we've also introduced, for instance, drip irrigation, right, for that citrus field, such that actually now, right, for a lot of the farmers who are also, living in that community, some of them are getting quite elderly, right? They no longer have to sort of like carry buckets of water and do that irrigation manually. Right now, actually, it's just as simple as, tapping a few things on their phone. They can just control that irrigation, right? So for a lot of these farmers, they're able to really enjoy a quality of life improvement. And so when we met that farmer in Yunnan, it was something that was very touching to me, right? Because you can actually see this is someone whom, our platform is benefiting, right? And people, I think when the consumers know on our platform that they are buying from a farmer in need, it also makes them feel good, right? And I think especially, I think a lot of people online on this conversation would know as well, right? For the younger generation of consumers, they don't just care about buying something, or they don't just care about like having it delivered and being convenient. They also want to make an impact in their own way. And so I think that's something that our platform has also really tried to just integrate into the whole shopping experience, right? So when you're browsing for fresh products on our platform, you'll frequently see, some indication that, this is a farmer in need, right? Or you're helping a farmer who's living below the poverty line when you buy this product. So it's something that is very seamlessly integrated. And for me, it was very impactful when we could actually meet someone, right, whom we were directly benefiting through our Duoduo Farm initiative. And I think, our vision is, apart from just having single farms here and there, it's really to also prompt a wider involvement by society, right? Because we as Pinduoduo can only do so much, right? But if we can actually demonstrate that, hey, when you make these changes to for farmers, when you give them clear access to the market, which is what we do through our Duoduo Farms, right? This is something that also incentivizes the farmers to keep through with the program that we outlined for them, right? So they really want to see it through because there's now the assurance that a big platform like PDD will help them sell the products at the end of the program that we're proposing. So then other people can also perhaps develop similar programs, right? And then we hope to have more of these self-sustaining cooperatives sprout out, right? That can then benefit more farmers like the one whom I visited.
Oh, wonderful, thank you. Thanks for sharing that story. I thought, this is what the difference would be, right? Or is the difference that is. So large organizations like PDD, kind of helping to exemplify some of the stories, amplify it, and helping the consumer kind of understand where the source of the item they're purchasing comes from. So I salute PDD for taking that effort. I just wanted to take a quick 30-second soundbite and invite all our guests who are listening in. You have the opportunity. We have Xinyi here with a vast amount of knowledge you've already heard. You're welcome to ask any questions. Just pop in your questions in the chat box, and we'd be happy to share it with Xinyi so that she can respond to you. So while you're doing that, your earlier example, I think it's a nice segue. You talked about the farmer, and you talked about the individual who's purchasing something through your platform PDD. Now, that was very inspirational. Now, what about businesses? What can other businesses do, or align themselves to how PDD is thinking, with the ambition that together we create a city of good? Any advice, any suggestions for other business owners out there?
Yeah, I think my experience so far in this role has really taught me that actually there are a lot of companies out there who do want to do good, but they know what they know very well, but it's kind of that somewhat tedious process, right, of actually reaching out and really having to brainstorm and think about where there are potential areas of synergies. So I think when it comes to agriculture, everyone knows that, okay, it's an industry that's relatively underdeveloped in terms of digitization. So potentially a huge opportunity there. But it's also tough, right? So that's why it's also relatively under digitized. And there are all these companies that have good solutions, but they're kind of all in their individual silos, right? And they're all also trying to think about who they can partner up with, right, to better reach the farmer. So instead of everyone trying to sort of do their individual marketing, right, perhaps it's actually more impactful if you could join up in, say, a partnership of sorts. So I think really the main sort of advice I would have, which is not really very groundbreaking, is the importance of just actually reaching out, right, and having these conversations and being a bit more imaginative, right, in terms of thinking about where your individual strengths are. So even if you don't necessarily have something there today in terms of a business line, but you can see a clear path in which this actually taps on an existing business function that you have, right? So that's something that potentially could be a good start for a conversation, right? Because if we just keep thinking about, I need to get this, and all that lined up, right, in order to execute or to have something, it may seem too daunting, right? And then it may just remain as an idea sitting on like the back burner for quite some time.
Thanks, Xinyi. I have somebody who's pretty shy, so the person has direct chatted me and has a question. I presume that the individual is a student. So the question is this: Xinyi, your story and the work that PDD is doing is rather inspiring. I'm in my 20s. I have one more year to complete my education. What can I do, to follow your footsteps and, kind of venture out there, right? I'm a Singaporean too. I'd love to be based overseas like you and contributing the way you are. What's your advice for me? What can I do?
Yeah, I think it's great that the person asking a question is willing to venture overseas, right, and is open to diverse experiences. So that's something that I highly encourage, right? Because and Nisa, you've had a long experience working in Central Asia as well. So I'm sure you would also agree the sort of benefits, right? Not just I think in terms of the content of the job itself, but just being in a different environment, being able to sort of familiarize yourself with how people in a different part of the world think and operate. That's something that is very valuable and very hard to actually just extract from sort of like book knowledge alone, right? So I think to this person, especially I think now, in the wake of COVID, it may be a bit more challenging applying for jobs. So I think to the extent that you are open to relocating, to going elsewhere, I think that's great, right? Because potentially you could be tapping onto a wider pool of opportunities. I would also say, when it comes to your interest, right, whether it's a particular industry that you have some idea you might want to go into, it's always a good idea to also just reach out or join more kind of networking sessions or webinars, right? I think in my youth, I frowned upon the concept of networking because I thought, oh, it's so fake. Oh, you're just going there passing out name cards or whatever, right? These days there are no name cards, everything's digital. But I think that actually makes things a bit easier, right? Because it is probably a bit easier for most people to just drop a direct message, right? Ask somebody something, or maybe follow up on LinkedIn, right? Just say, hey, I enjoyed hearing from you during whatever webinar, or hey, I thought you made an interesting point, or I saw that you have a very interesting background. Can I find out a little bit more from you? And I think you'll discover that a lot of people are very happy to share their own experience, right? I myself, I was just on a webinar yesterday which featured some people with a lot of experience in sustainability, right? And so after the webinar, I just reached out and said, hey, I'm also working in this field. I'm relatively new to it. Would love to just get connected and get some ideas, right? What are some good resources? What are some best practices, etc.? And I think you'll be surprised. A lot of people are very willing to share. So sometimes you just need to, have that, courage or initiative to take the first step.
Okay, thank you. Xinyi, I thought that was very useful for the young person. I would just add one more point, and this is something you shared with me last week. The idea of leaving home to enter a new terrain and working. The biggest takeaway is your absorption of the culture and the understanding, of people who are very similar to you but have grown up in a very different setting. So from a comms perspective, you really need to understand where you are and apply that. So that's where your learning point actually is. You may be doing the same thing, but just the fact that it's a different location, your game plan needs to change. So I thought that was quite useful when we chatted earlier. It is now about 5:27. We have time for one more question. So Xinyi, here's one to you. In this COVID climate, and building on the earlier question, what is your advice to to graduates who have just graduated? A lot of them have completed in the last 2-3 months. The market is pretty tight. Perhaps there are not that many jobs around. What would your advice be to someone just entering the market at this point in time, which seems gloomy, but it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, I think what I shared earlier about being open to opportunities in other places, I think that's something that I would stress again, right? So I think oftentimes when employers look at CVs, they're not just looking at kind of what you've accomplished on paper, right? But I think sort of your openness or your experience with other countries or other cultures, that can be something that's a real strength. And I think just being flexible or adaptable. So I think increasingly the employer today is also looking for someone who can be a fast learner, right? Or at least somebody who's willing to put in the effort. So I may hire you in a particular role, right? But things could change, right? So down the line, maybe in a month or 2 months' time, I might need this person to take on an additional responsibility that wasn't necessarily in the job scope previously outlined, but is adjacent to it. It fits. It makes sense for this person to do it. So then I think for the young graduate or the job seeker in today's market, I think it's important to also communicate that, right? Perhaps share an instance whereby you were willing to go the extra mile, right? Maybe you weren't even expressly asked, but then you felt that, oh, okay, doing this would help me in my job, right? So when I used to be based in New York covering tech companies, I used to go to a few kind of like startup networking events, right? And hope to just kind of learn by osmosis. So obviously a lot of the very technical terms kind of flew over my head, but at least just kind of like going there, it was after work hours on a weeknight. I could have gone home and watched some TV, but I felt that like, hey, actually just getting to meet different people, just listening to the language that they're using, right? What are some of the buzzwords that show up, right? After a few of these events, what are some of the trends that I'm seeing? And then maybe that can be a very differentiated angle, right, for me to explore. So that's something that nobody would tell you outright to do, right? I think bosses sometimes are also very cautious, especially with younger hires. Don't want to overwhelm them, don't want to like make them feel that they have to work all the time. But I think if you are able to look for areas where your personal interest can maybe fit into something that is relevant and useful for your job, then I think that can be a real win-win situation, right? I think another example is, for instance, if you have other passions outside of work, can you maybe extract some of those experiences to help you, right, in getting the job that you want? So I do a lot of volunteering work, and so in that I've had to organize events. Sometimes I'm an MC, sometimes I'm a logistics coordinator, etc. But those skills actually came into good use when I was asked to organize a large-scale investment forum for GIC. Right. So that was, again, something that clearly is not really in my job scope as an investment analyst. But I had experience, right? And I was able to sort of parlay that experience into something that was relevant for my work and to execute it well. So I think, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, times are hard, I have to put, my personal life, my personal interests on hold. I think it's really more trying to be a bit more flexible and adaptable and creative in terms of how can you bring things that you are passionate about, things that you are good at in maybe one sphere of your life, and use that to help you, build your career skills.
Thank you so much, Xinyi. When we have speakers like you, time just flies by. We are already past 5:30. So we wanted to thank you on behalf of IPRS for sparing your time. We know you're in China, you're doing very important work and have a very busy schedule. So on behalf of the viewers here, we'd like to thank you for sparing the time. Thank you so much.